this design from a non-Christian perspective. They're in a position where they can't deny the design. The design is clearly admitted.
Okay.
What they're trying to do is say, well, maybe we don't need the God of the Bible. Maybe there's some other answer for the design.
All right. How does someone, you mentioned the name Richard Dawkins, how does someone like Dawkins respond to the evidence for design in astronomy?
Well, in his book, The God Delusion, he clearly admits that there's a huge amount of evidence for design on a cosmic scale. But he says, God is more complex than the universe. God is more complex than we human beings. And anything that's complex demands design. And he says that would demand even a higher level of design than what we see in the universe. So he says, who designs the designer? And basically, he simply come up with a sophisticated restatement of the old argument that God created the universe. Who created God?
Yes.
But like many before him, Richard Dawkins commits a category error. He assumes that God's under the same limitations as the universe and all entities within the universe, probably coming from the Carl Sagan perspective that the universe is all there is or was or will be. So if there is a God, God must be confined within the universe. But that's not Christian theology. Christian theology is that God transcends the universe. He does fill the entirety of his universe, but he's not limited by the universe. He's not limited by space and time. And for example, I point out in the book that if God has got access to the equivalent of multiple dimensions of time, rather than the single cosmic time dimension to which we're confined and the universe is confined, he need not have a cause. A cause is something that's mandated by anything that's limited to a single dimension of time that can't be stopped or reversed. But clearly, the God of the Bible is not so limited. Moreover, we have things like the space-time theorems of general relativity that prove that such an entity must exist, who's not limited by the causal restrictions of a single dimension of time.
Hugh, is there a self-organization principle in nature, as several non-theistic scientists now seem to claim?
Well, this has probably been most popularly promoted, excuse me, by the Santa Fe Institute. And that's headed up by the atheist Stuart Kaufman. And he says, well, sure, there's all this complexity in the universe and all this evidence for fine-tuning design, but perhaps there's a hidden law of physics, what he calls a self-organization principle, and what he's called in one of his books the fourth law of thermodynamics. And his claim is that if you get a little bit of departure from thermodynamic equilibrium, where that small region of the universe has a slightly higher degree of complexity than other regions of the universe, there's a self-organization principle that will evolve that complexity into higher and higher states of complexity that explains the origin of life, it explains the origin of humanity. Nevertheless, Stuart Kaufman is honest enough to admit that he has zero physical evidence for a self-organization principle, and then I argue in More Than a Theory that it's impossible for that principle to be hidden from the view of the physicists. That there was such a principle out there, we'd be clearly seeing it. And matter of fact, one of the design features of the universe, a feature necessary for life, is that if life exists, the universe must be extremely uniform and homogeneous. And that being a requirement for the existence of physical life, that rules out the possibility that there could be a self-organization principle capable of explaining the origin of life or the origin of humanity.
Hugh, when it comes to fine-tuning, many scientists would acknowledge a design, as you just mentioned. However, now the idea of a multiverse has come, well, it's not terribly recent. You can tell me when it came about, but many scientists seem to be putting stock in that idea.
That's probably the most popular atheist response to this overwhelming evidence for design. The idea that there's not just one universe, but a lot of universes. In fact, they invoke an infinite number of universes. An infinite number of universes where they're not all the same, they're all different. Matter of fact, they're so such that they manifest every conceivable set of physical circumstances. So it's really not an infinite number of universes, it's an infinite number of an infinite number of universes.
Yikes.
Yikes is right. And I argue that the timing is not coincidental. It is a relatively recent proposal. And scientists were not proposing this multiverse answer to the design of the universe until the evidence for design became utterly overwhelming, pointing towards the supernatural.
So you're talking just decades, or how long?
Right. I mean, really, we're only talking the last 2 decades, and really only the last decade where it's been proposed in any sophisticated way. So I'm arguing that the timing of the proposal is not a coincidence. It's a direct response to the power of the evidence for supernatural, superintelligent design.
So just to get it straight, would all scientists acknowledge that this universe appears to have had a beginning and it's fine-tuned? There's just no escaping that. They acknowledge that.
And if this universe is the only universe that is, and it has only been existing for finite time, then it seems inescapable that there must be this supernatural, superintelligent creator that designed it for the benefit of life and humanity. That's why they're proposing an infinite number of universes.
All right.
Where they all have different characteristics, and they're saying by pure chance we live in the universe with the just right characteristics. All the other universes would be sterile. Ours happens to have those lucky circumstances.
Okay, without giving away the story again, what are some of the problems in the multiverse argument?
Well, number one, it's not an anti-Christian doctrine.
Okay.
This idea that there's only one universe is not biblical theology. The Bible makes it quite clear that God made more than one creation. Perhaps not an infinite number, but He certainly made more than one. So this is not an argument that's been unique to the atheists. And all these multiverse speculations do demand a transcendent causal agent to explain their existence. What is interesting is every multiverse hypothesis out there is still stuck with the implications of the space-time theorems and a theorem that was produced by Bourdet, Vilenkin, and Guth, that any universe that expands on average must have a beginning of space and time, and therefore a causal agent beyond space and time. So in one sense you can argue every multiverse proposal out there is a theistic proposal, not an atheistic proposal. And the fourth comment is the multiverse, the way it's proposed by atheists, explains too much. I mean, if they're talking about an infinite number of universes where every set of conceivable physical characteristics is possible, I could imagine that there would be, in that kind of a concept, not just one Earth, but an infinite number of planets exactly like the Earth. An infinite number of planets exactly like the Earth where they have beaches with patterns in the sand on the beach. And an infinite number of those beach patterns would be identical to all the words that are written in my book by pure chance, which case my book is totally meaningless. Now, some might argue that indeed is the case, but you'd have to actually argue that any achievement by human beings has no meaning, no purpose. And what scientist is ever going to argue me? Why would a scientist bother to publish an article in a journal if someone could just argue that it's a product of pure chance of random features being put down on the page to look like something that had meaning and purpose within it? And then the other point is that in astronomy, and you'll see this in the book in the earlier chapters, we don't just see design on the scale of the universe, we see it on all size scales. We see it in the cluster of galaxies that we live in. We see it at the level of the galaxy, the solar system, the Earth, the surface of the Earth, the life that's on the surface of the Earth. When we look at the fundamental particles, no matter what size scale we choose to look at, we see this overwhelming evidence for design. So it's really incumbent upon those appealing to the multiverse to explain why going up to the next size level isn't simply going to reveal more of what we've already observed at smaller size.